All right, we are live. We're going to talk about a book by Bret, Weinstein and Heying. The book is called The Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century. I think it was written maybe last year, the year before.
Yeah, I think so.
But I did a second read through. You did a second read through. Originally, we were going to talk about this book a while ago, but it just went on the back burner for a while for various reasons.
Yeah,
But
it kind of
we
became a backup chat.
Yeah, so we're finally talking about this book, and after second read-throughs, I believe Andrew still has the same opinion of the book. I have some slight differences now from the first time I read it, because I think the first time I read it, I gave it like 2 stars on Goodreads, and then I upgraded that to 3. So there's definitely different topics in the book that they talk about. My favorite really has nothing to do with evolutionary biology or because a lot of the evolutionary biology stuff that they talk about is not really anything new to me. The sciencey stuff that they kind of talk about in the beginning is like an interesting refresher, but it's not new. And I'm sure it was kind of the same way for you. And one of the things I think I enjoyed most about the book was hearing like their personal stories and anecdotes about going through the jungle and all these different mishaps that happened. And I was like, wow, these people have been on adventures for sure.
Yeah, that's one thing that one part of the book that I thought was interesting too, and one thing that I respect about Bret Weinstein of some disagreements that I have with some of what they talk about.
Yeah, one of the odd things about the book is that it is.
Are you still there? I think I lost your audio.
Can you hear me?
Oh, maybe I glitched. Yeah, I think I glitched out for a second there, maybe, actually.
Yeah, you glitched out for a little while, but one of the things that confused me just a little bit is that the book is not written in first person. So what's weird is you often hear them refer to themselves as Bret or Heather, but not I.
Yeah, I noticed that too. They're talking about each other in the third person.
Yeah, so when you're listening to the audiobook and they're obviously reading the audiobook themselves, it just sounds weird to hear Bret refer to himself as Bret and Heather referring to herself as Heather instead of I.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I thought that was a little strange, but they could have, I don't know, maybe changed that a little bit when they're doing audio. I know sometimes there are some changes that are made specifically for audiobooks, but I just guess they didn't do that here. So I know, let's talk about what the book is. And what it seems to be is a self-help guide based off of evolutionary biology.
Yeah.
So there's kind of three parts of this book. The initial part is explaining what evolutionary biology is. And then you have how to apply the principles of evolutionary biology. And then the end is like sense making. I know there's talk of postmodernism in there. And there is some slight like culture war stuff in like the latter half of the book.
Mm-hmm.
But what did you think of the first section?
Where they're talking mostly about biology and that sort of stuff.
Right, they are kind of tracking like the timeline of evolution because they go through like the various stages from um, one-celled organisms to the complete human animal, and they kind of go
Yeah.
through like the different stages of evolution that occurred.
Yeah, I would say that's probably my favorite part of the book, and they were they were even talking too about a little bit about cultural evolution versus Richard Dawkins talking about phenotypes and that sort of aspect. So yeah, and all that stuff where them talking about the history of evolution and that sort of stuff was pretty interesting to me. Even though I've heard some of that before, like you said, it's always good to have a refresher on that. And different evolutionary biologists have different opinions about topics like group selection and phenotypes and how much culture can be attributed to evolution and vice versa.
Right, because there was some other um, evolutionary biology book I read that I'm trying to not get confused with this, which was a David Sloan Wilson book, which I highly
Oh,
recommend.
okay. Oh,
Uh,
yeah, we talked about that. You, if you wouldn't mind sending that to me, I would love to read that.
okay,
Yeah,
I thought I would have uploaded it, but if it's not up there, I'll see if I can upload it to
yeah. I don't
the
think it's in the
Drive.
last folder that you sent me, but yeah, I would
It
love to
might be in
read
the
that.
previous folder, because those are from two different Google Drives.
Right,
Because
right.
one of them got full, and then there's a newer one.
Okay.
Okay, so I think a lot of the contention about this book. Well, do you want to talk about Bret, Weinstein, and Heather Heying and their kind of place in the cultural zeitgeist at the moment?
Yeah, I guess. Well, right now, I guess in terms of the cultural zeitgeist, they've been doing a lot of kind of vaccine hesitant or anti-vaxxer kind of stuff, and they've been, I guess you could say they're kind of, I don't know, kind of right leaning, I guess, in terms of the culture war and criticizing, kind of just conflating things like postmodernism and all that kind of stuff with stupid woke lefty shit. So, like, I know you and I both have problems with this super woke lefty shit, but also problems with people lumping them into these broad philosophical categories that are totally unrelated for, or at least almost completely unrelated, like postmodernism and critical theory and critical race theory and that sort of thing. So yeah, they kind of seem to be on one particular side of the culture war in that sense. They're not as like unhinged and crazy right wingers as some people for sure, but they're I guess they've kind of chosen sides on that instead, even though they probably would say that they have a fairly nuanced take on these things, but they seem kind of more, at least more in that direction than the other direction, I guess.
Yeah, so just a quick crash course on these two. Bret Weinstein came to fame due to an incident at Evergreen College, in
Right.
which I guess some super woke students were taking offense to him objecting to a event on campus that had to do with forcing certain people with a certain skin color off campus for a day.
Yeah.
So anyway, there was a lot of backlash, a lot of media coverage. This was definitely during the era of college craziness,
Yeah.
if you want to call it that. You know, that era, there were a lot of videos of just crazy woke college people doing crazy woke stuff on their campuses, and this was one of those kind of instances of that. In this case, he was basically threatened off campus, and allegedly there were like mobs roaming around that were looking for him at times. What eventually happened was both he and his wife resigned, and then they filed a suit against the school. And I believe they won like $500,000 in their settlement or something like that.
Yeah.
Ever since then, they've been pretty much, I guess, taking an IDW role,
Yeah.
doing some podcast stuff mainly and doing public speaking. So,
Yeah, for sure. And I think we probably talked about this before. Especially that's the college campus craziness reminds me of Jonathan Haidt's newest book called The Coddling of the American Mind. That their initial leaving of Evergreen and stuff, I would say, is pretty much justified, and but then the whole IDW thing, I think that started off as a good cause and then just kind of jumped the fucking shark at one point. So that's yeah, they're still like useful and valuable people in terms of their opinions, but much less so than they used to be, I think. But their book overall, I would say, which is usually the case with me, I think their book is much better than a lot of the public speaking that they do.
yeah, the book is a little bit more nuanced. It sticks somewhat more to scientific principles. They don't go heavy into philosophy, but there is this one thing that they do mention a lot. I forgot what it was called. There's a certain term for it, but the term is like there's a fence and you shouldn't remove the fence before knowing what that fence is for. There's like a specific term they had.
I don't
Do you
remember the
remember?
term, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some type of analogy that they use a lot in the book, and the analogy is that if you remove something, it could have unforeseen consequences, or if you change something, it could have unforeseen consequences. So they talk about this a lot. I know what they talk about though is definitely part of. I would say it's more of a conservative siding ideology. I would say because if you're doing science or doing tests or trying to test something out, you're going to have to try and change something to see what the outcome is. I think you could probably do it in test cases and stuff like that, but um, I guess what they say is you can't change it until you have sufficient information to see what that change would cause. So I'm guessing they're talking about, doing studies to see what will happen. But then again, when you're talking about social science, it's incredibly difficult to do any type of study that's reproducible that
Yeah.
will tell you what the outcome will be when you change something in society.
Yeah,
So I
they
would have to
call
say,
social scientists call that the replication crisis, I think.
yeah, so it's not this, while this advice would be good when you're talking about non-social science issues, specifically social science issues about humans. But I don't think it's that cut and dry. Like this, when are you going to have sufficient information to figure out whether the change will do what you want? It's
Yeah,
probably not even possible really to get that. It's way too
yeah,
complex, and social science isn't to a level where we have a lot of predictive capacity.
yeah,
Um,
that's a good point for sure. Yeah.
so, yeah, I know they bring this principle up a lot, but um, I was kind of having doubts about that particular principle in application to human. And that's one of the things too. It seems like when I just think about people who are evolutionary biologists, they seem to have more certainty about human behavior than just like your run-of-the-mill social science. Because
Yeah,
whenever I
yeah, for
read
sure.
like evolutionary biology, um, and I'm talking like more specific stuff like Gad Sad and other characters within that milieu, they seem to have a lot of certainty about um, tracking human behaviors along with evolutionary principles.
Well, especially with evolutionary psychologists like Gad said, that's why I think that like Chris Ryan, for example, in his book "Sex at Dawn," that we're both familiar with, talks about how well basically is critical of evolutionary psychology to the point not of just throwing out evolutionary psychology as whole in as a whole as a study of science, but just that a lot of evolutionary psychologists, and there is difference between them, but they tend to make these massive, very certain claims about human behavior based on kind of like flawed explanations in a lot of ways.
Yeah, so there's sometimes I do have that skepticism when we have so much certainty, and especially when it comes to social science. It's like, okay, these are evolutionary biological um, based solutions, and I think at least they do kind of. It sounds like they do say, "Hey, this isn't one size fits all," but it seems like, oh yeah, they almost still proceed and talk as if the particular outline that they give on a whole benefits society. But
Yeah. Well, the
so,
I think we'll probably get to those. You probably want to get to a few other things before those specific criticisms that annoy me.
right. So yeah, so the purpose of this book, which yeah, it's a hunter-gatherer's guide to the 21st century. So they kind of examine multiple things, some of them quite obvious. Like we know that, and like some of this stuff is touched upon in other books. Like I know you mentioned Sex at Dawn. I have not read the book, but I've listened to Chris Ryan enough to know what his points are for certain aspects of things, like
Oh, we should
specifically.
do a book chat about that at some point. It's a great book.
Yeah, I'll need to read it. But I've heard like so many different podcasts with the guy on and his own
Yeah,
podcast.
you
So I
probably
think I have
enjoy.
a lot of solid. I'm pretty good with knowing what his views are. I know another thing to look at would be Yuval Harari. What's that book called?
Sapiens.
Yeah, he also goes over how the Industrial Revolution and agriculture, how that changed and caused some different stresses and issues for humans. Like we didn't have many back problems before agriculture came along, and that's
Hmm.
because we didn't spend a lot of time stooping over picking out weeds or anything like that. Um,
Right.
that's the same thing with the 20 when they're coming to talking about the 21st century. We're talking about problems with the 21st century. This is
Hmm.
staying stationary, working on computers. When our bodies were designed for something else. But I think there's a macro argument for whatever they're proposing here in this book. But that's probably the macro argument is something I'd have to talk about like towards the end of this discussion because it makes you look at what everything they're saying and the purpose of evolution particularly. But now, were there any other points in the first half of the book that you wanted to address? before we started talking about the solutions or their quote unquote self-help advice for being human?
Not anything else that I can think of right now, no.
All right. So we can go ahead and jump into the meat and potatoes of things. I know there's probably quite a few things that you didn't like. I know one of the big things is monogamy and how they hype monogamy up pretty well. And
Yeah,
they have a
that
few arguments regarding that, and um, it makes sense if you're having kids. That's what I'm gonna say. If you don't have kids,
you can
um,
be a polyamorous married person and have kids, but I mean from people I've seen talk about that on podcasts, it's that it seems to be I forget their oh yeah, Jeffrey Miller and Diana Fleischman are two evolutionary psychologists I like actually who are married and in a polyamorous relationship and they might have kids, and there are people like that who say that you can do that sort of thing, but it's way more difficult. It's not just like running around being slutty like people talk about it. It's more it's more psychologically challenging and just challenging in general in terms of how you arrange all of these things. So it can be done, but it's probably way more difficult.
yeah. So I think that's one thing to address. Like, I don't mind if polyamorous couples are doing their thing. Um, I do. I don't know if there's not because it's interesting. Kids, I don't know how that's going to get resolved in a society that's not designed for that. You know what I mean? Like our particular society is not designed for it. Then you would have to see how are the Mormons doing it, and are there any studies into that? So I don't know. And when I talk about Mormons, I'm talking about like the polygamous Mormons. Um, but I think they talked briefly about polygamous Mormons, and they saw that it wasn't like the relationship between the male and the harem is not an equal relationship. Um, and it seemed quite difficult to make something like that work well for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like the more variables you add, the more difficult it becomes.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. That makes sense. Like at least that it would be. It's probably way easier to have two people in a monogamous relationship in terms of children. But I guess it depends on how you look at the extended family too, because the one thing that's different about hunter-gatherer cultures is that there was a more extended family and children would kind of be raised by many different adults in their surrounding community, and you could look at it that way in a polygamous or a polyamorous relationship or whatever the opposite of a polygamous relationship with one woman and several men, but that still seems like how you were talking about how our culture operates basically based on the idea of monogamy. That could be more difficult. So I get that. I just the part of it that I don't like in particular is when they basically start talking about how essentially casual sex is inherently bad for everyone because it can be fun, but you'll regret it later on in life, particularly if you're a woman, because women, they do this evolutionary psychology thing generalizing about men and women, about how women are get more emotionally attached to men and men get less emotionally attached to women through sex. So therefore it's bad for women and it's bad for men and women because it teaches them to have more transactional relationships and to not look for love and that sort of thing. But these arguments to me are all just massive generalizations that don't really apply to men and women in general. I mean, at least in my experience and the experience of all other adults I know and their experiences with dating life, that really seems to vary on the in terms of the individual, in terms of whether you get emotionally attached, how you want to look at relationships. Maybe some people never want to have kids. I know at least one woman who never wants to have kids. My cousin and his girlfriend never want to have kids, but they are in a monogamous relationship. And there are some women who get more emotionally attached than men in terms of sex, but there are men who get more emotionally attached in terms of sex too. And I've gotten emotionally attached before myself, and there are too many variables here, and I think there's too much individual variation between people to make these such a massive generalizations about people like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing I'll note is I was looking through what some people were saying about this book, and Daniele Bellelli gave it 1 star.
Oh, okay. He liked it even less than me.
And Cuban gave it 4.
No, okay. Chris is he's more, I think he's a little more open-minded to arguments like this than you and I are, perhaps, or just open-minded about books in general, perhaps.
Yeah, so this is a self-help guide, so I'm wondering who the market is in particular. Who are they targeting with this book? Like, I know, at least when you think about Jordan Peterson's work, his target was lonely men who had disordered lifestyles. And I know he kind of specifically mentioned that many times in different settings.
Yeah.
I'm unsure who this book is targeted to. And that's what interests me as well, because who is the target audience for this book? Is it there's a lot of people who hate this book apparently, but
I don't know, maybe young people in general?
yeah, maybe. I don't know. Like, I get it. I get what they're trying to do, but it's oddly, because there are some things that they say that you would consider pretty left in this book, but there are some things that they say that seem pretty right in this book. But I know you had a lot of contention about the monogamy aspect and this pushing that in particular. I think what they tried to justify that was like because we don't know until birth what the sex of the baby would be or whose baby it would be, because I think there's this, what do they call it? There's a particular term that pertains to how nobody knows whose child it would be, and this is before modern science, right?
Well, yeah, I was just thinking too, in terms of, I was just thinking too, in terms of monogamy, another aspect of that not just Chris Ryan, but others have mentioned as well, is that monogamy is historically extremely new. And in terms of evolution, this is where another reason why I disagree with people like Bret Weinstein and Heather Heying and Jordan Peterson when they talk about how important monogamy is and how it leads to all these outcomes. I think those are just massive generalizations, and they're really not generally true, because there is so much individual variation between people, and like our culture is built on monogamy, like you were talking about. So we have we have this massive bias toward monogamy, but I don't think it necessarily has to be that way. And there, like, this relates to my other criticisms too, but that we'll get to, about how, along with how they say monogamy is good for everyone and casual sex is bad for everyone, they claim that also BDSM and porn are bad for everyone too, which I think for similar reasons is also an inaccurate, massive generalization.
Yeah, so I know because there's arguments regarding how, I know, like, Chris Ryan probably goes in this camp too about how terrible modern life is for humans. But how do they reconcile that with the actual longevity is increasing?
Well, what Chris Ryan says about that is that, contrary to popular belief, people in hunter-gatherer cultures, and just farther back in time than that, even, they had the same lifespans as we do today. They would live to around 70 or 80 or something like that, but there was a lower life expectancy in spite of there being a roughly equal lifespan, because they were so much more susceptible to diseases and stuff like that, and it was easier to die. So there are advantages to modern medicine and stuff like that, which is why Chris Ryan, even though he criticizes the modern culture and the modern Western world a lot, he doesn't want to entirely throw the baby out with the bathwater and just go back to completely hunter-gatherer way of lifestyle.
Yeah, so I remember that fence analogy that we were talking about earlier. It's called Chesterton's fence.
Oh, okay. As in G.K. Chesterton?
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a really famous author from I think it was the early 1900s. Yeah.
Okay, you're familiar with his works?
A little bit, yeah. I read one of his books about eugenics that I thought was interesting, because he was against eugenics at a time where it was broadly accepted and legally mandated in most countries, and he was one of very few people who was skeptical of it. And I think he was also kind of like a hardcore Orthodox Christian.
Well, that's super interesting.
Yeah.
So, yeah, monogamy. So, what were some of the other self-help things that they were, because there's a lot of prescription in this book. That's
Yeah.
what happens with self-help books.
Yeah,
In
that's why I
general.
do that's like I was saying, that's my least favorite part of this book, all the self-help tips.
Well, what was interesting though is that they did talk about psychedelics a little bit.
Yeah, I like that part actually. They basically talked favorably about psychedelics. I'm biased towards liking that, so I liked that.
Yeah, so what did you want to say about their advocacy for that?
About psychedelics? I thought
Yeah.
that made a lot of sense to me. The arguments like that I've heard before make sense too, and something basically a similar kind of way of looking at it is that psychedelics used to be be exclusively used in a really ritualized practice, where you would get together in a group of people and have this profoundly powerful bonding experience using this drug, which is why psychonauts talk all the time about how important set and setting is when you do psychedelics, because if you do it in the wrong type of setting, if you're going to take psychedelic mushrooms and then go to a fucking rave, you're going to freak out and have a bad trip. But if you do mushrooms with your friend and sit around and talk about life, or go for a walk in the forest, or do an actual ritual like what they used to do, where you get together in a group and you have all of these particular ritualized practices to do with it, then that can be a profoundly good experience. And we know about recent studies, for example, that have confirmed people's claims that some things like psychedelics and mushrooms and MDMA and things like that can help people, even do things like help veterans cure their PTSD, and they can help with depression and all sorts of other psychological conditions like that.
Right. Yeah, so they were pretty open with having society look more at the benefits of some of these psychedelics and not just put like a blanket ban. It's about time, really. We're scientific enough so that we could probably put more studies and resources to figure out what kind of benefits these things have for people. I know there's been science moving along for it. I know largely, like CBD is good for epilepsy, and that's pretty much not disputed anymore. But there
And
is definitely
THC
go
is too. Actually, I looked at when I got epilepsy, I made an assumption. The assumption at first that CBD itself is better for epilepsy than THC. So I was buying weed strains with higher CBD concentrations than THC concentrations. But then I looked it up and found out that apparently, actually, THC is better for epilepsy than CBD is. They're both good, but the THC actually is better. So that's like I try to use both different types of weed in that way now, to have a CBD dominant one and then also a THC dominant one too, because they're both good.
Yeah, so I'm just speaking on just like those who aren't willing to get the high, those that just want
Yeah,
to
of course. Yeah, yeah.
take care of their epilepsy issue without imbibing in the aspects that cause people to get go on a little bit of a trip.
Right.
Well, at least there's an entryway there. But one of the things too I thought was interesting, because Heather and Bret, they're atheists, right? But in this book, it sounds like they were kind of promoting religion.
Yeah, that I like that too. Actually, how they were. It kind of sounded similar to what Jonathan Haidt and David Sloan Wilson say, in terms of basically saying that there can be some psychological benefits to religion for people due to cultural evolution, because it's a way for people to bond together, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, because I know they talk about the necessity of metaphorically true beliefs versus literally true beliefs.
Yeah, I
And
like that.
and it almost sounded like Peterson-esque when they were
Yeah.
talking about some of these things.
Yeah, that's what, why I've said before. It's kind of funny. I actually mostly agree with Jordan Peterson on truth, because he doesn't realize that he makes ironically postmodern claims about the definition of truth, and that there can be different types of truth, even though he criticizes postmodernism all the time.
Right, right. So, I think they were talking about too, like about food. So, if I'm not mistaken, there was some talk about the types of food that we consume, and I believe they brought up GMOs. Do you remember that?
Not any specific details, but I kind of remember them talking about uh, how they've been bad and have adapted food to be less healthy than the way that it used to be, something like that.
Well, I know they were criticizing a lot of different diets, like even including like paleo diets and stuff. I remember them criticizing raw food diets, but it doesn't sound like they really gave like a solid prescription for the types of foods that you need to eat.
Okay.
That's what my feel was, because I heard a lot of criticism of diets, but they didn't really prescribe a particular diet.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that actually, because people are really cultish about diets, and the more I've learned and the more I've experimented with myself and the more I've studied nutrition throughout the years, the more I basically have just come to the conclusion that people should follow whatever diet works best for them, and that's the diet that everyone should follow. That's the only diet that everyone should follow.
Yes. Interesting enough, in this book, they touched briefly upon the Decepticons. Like, they didn't go fully into like their conspiratorium when talking about that stuff. But I knew, did they?
I don't
I
think
know
they
they
even
talked about it
really.
briefly, just real
Yeah, I
briefly.
don't
They
think they
talked
even
about it.
really criticized what people like them call the COVID regime that much, really. I seem to remember them not spending so little time on it that you wouldn't know that they're so vaccine hesitant and critical of vaccines if you only read the book. I don't know. Do I remember that correctly?
I'm not sure, because I do know they talked about it briefly, but they didn't go in depth about that.
Right. Okay.
So, because one of the other things that they talked about is radical leftism, and they talk about that.
Right.
Yeah, they got kind of like a big grudge with that. They're, I don't know, whenever they talk about that, they get pretty conspiratorial.
Yeah.
I remember this one podcast where they accused like BLM of trying to abolish STEM.
Yeah, I saw that too. And they said, I've seen Bret Weinstein literally say that BLM is Maoist too.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, they're not cohesive enough to be Maoist. Like, oh yeah, the founders, quote unquote, who are, and the founders of BLM have little to do with like they don't run it. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, they kind of started it, but
It
they
was
don't.
founded by lesbian Marxists, bro.
Yeah, it's like saying the person who founded Bitcoin has all the sway over everybody's political ideology. It's just
Right.
not the case. Like
Even though
BLM,
if I understand correctly, people don't actually 100% know for sure that the guy they think it is actually the guy who invented it.
yeah, people think Elon Musk invented it. There's just a whole
Oh,
bunch of
really?
people.
I
Yeah,
never
it's
heard
like
that theory before.
there's like conspiracy theories about Elon Musk being the creator of Bitcoin.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I was like, man, I know you need content or whatever, and you have like a captured audience that's like super anti-woke, but at least don't dive into the conspiracy stuff. It just, I don't know, I started, their credibility on me started waning once they started into into that realm where
Yeah.
they were just, it
Well,
just seemed ridiculous.
yeah. The Bret Weinstein's. Well, both of them have gotten super. Especially Bret Weinstein has gotten super fucking conspiratorial about the Decepticons, right? If you've seen that last Joe Rogan podcast he did with Peter Corey, they were fucking wearing massive tinfoil hats.
Oh yeah, it's funny because you know that Decepticon study about Uver Pectin. that
Uberpectin.
Peterson was promoting. Not only was it Peterson, it was also Dr. Corey was pushing that as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I saw this. I saw a few of the same videos that you saw about that. I'm actually gonna make a video soon criticizing Jordan Peterson again. I'm gonna criticize him about ivermectin, this new Bill 67 in Canada that he's saying is the sequel to Bill C-15, basically, which made him famous in the first part, and then he connects it to critical theory, even though in postmodernism, even though he doesn't know what he's talking about. And yeah, the if I understand it correctly, the first author of the study that Jordan Peterson and Peter Corey were promoting, he tagged Jordan Peterson himself and said, "Hey, I'm the first author of this study. It had to be retracted due to flawed methods and has not been replicated." Apparently Jordan Peterson didn't see that, or it was ignored, and then it's gone on to spread massive misinformation about how supposedly ivermectin can help with the Decepticons, even though it actually hasn't been shown in any legitimate scientific studies to have any effect in comparison to any other drug.
Right. So one of the things you said, the second reading didn't change your mind at all, right?
No, not really. I still like some parts of it, like those that we were talking about, but yeah, just mostly it's the where they go from the explanations of evolution to all of these prescriptions. I think most of these prescriptions are kind of dumb.
Oh, some of the prescriptions are just kind of obvious, but some of them are not. Like one of the things that changed my mind on a little bit, and I tried to give more nuance to what they were saying, not because of the reasons they provided, because they provided reasons based off of evolutionary biology. And then I was thinking about, okay, if this is the case, how does the culture at large accept this as well? And then thinking about that, and I'm talking about like the polyamory stuff.
Mm-hmm.
At first, I was like, yeah, people should be able to do whatever they want to do. I still believe that. It doesn't mean that the things that people want to do are healthy. Like if someone wants to do 10 lines of cocaine, go ahead and let them do it. You know, it's their body, their choice. I think it comes down to me trying not to be a hypocrite. And what I'm
Yeah.
saying is what kind of standards would I want for either my daughter? You know, when I'm thinking about that, as like, would I want her to be in a polyamorous thing or a thing where she's not has an exclusive boyfriend or you know, something like that, you know, when she's older? And I can pretty much say I'd be pretty uncomfortable if she wasn't pursuing like a standard relationship.
But does
And I
that
think
mean
that's
that you shouldn't allow her to do it, though? I mean, to an
not saying you
extent, I
shouldn't
guess.
allow her. I'm just saying when I'm weighting things, I'm saying talking about preferences, right? Like when she
Mm-hmm.
becomes 18, it doesn't really matter what I say. Like I could try to influence her, but you know, they're their own persons at that time.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But yeah,
Yeah, I get that. I get that. You're allowed to. There's a difference between having preferences and administrating in them in some sort of authoritarian way, of course.
yeah. So my preference would be for her to have a traditional monogamous relationship, you know, whatever her sexuality is going to be. Like, I'm not gonna, I'm not going to be that parent that's like, oh, you know, I can't, yeah, you know, I'm going to accept whatever her sexuality is.
Not going to follow one of Jordan Peterson's rules from 12 Rules for Life, which is don't let your children do anything that makes you not like them.
Yeah, I think that's dumb.
Yeah.
But it's basically be an authoritarian to your children. And
Yeah.
even if it causes them psychological trauma, mold them into whatever you want to mold them. You know, it kind of reminds me of Donald Trump's dad. That's like the kind of advice that Donald Trump's father pretty much followed to a T.
Yeah, and then, well, look how Trump turned out.
Right. No, I wouldn't follow that. I would prefer, you know, because we're talking about social acceptance. I know it's less worrisome here in our country. There are other countries where social acceptance is very, very, very important. To me, it's not that important, but it's more important probably to my wife to have my daughter be socially accepted. And I don't know. I'm just thinking about if she had to raise kids and she's trying to do this weird polyamorous thing. I don't know if our society at this point accepts that and makes it beneficial. Like, I know, of course, I'm going to be accepting about whatever path she chooses because I want to be supportive. But I also do recognize that certain paths would be more difficult. And I think polyamory, like, that is not, I don't think that's like I think that's more of a choice thing rather than a born with it thing.
Oh,
Like a more of
yeah,
a,
that's probably true. Yeah.
yeah, so, you know, you can't just not become gay, you know what I mean? Um, but I think polyamory and the pursuance of that is mostly a choice. Like I can't think of it as like, oh, I was born to be polyamorous, and if I go against that, it's going to hurt me psychologically. I think you can make a choice that's more acceptable with society.
You mean
And that's just,
just theoretically speaking, if someone wanted to be polyamorous, they could just choose to be monogamous anyway?
well, I'm talking about specifically like, I think you don't choose your sexuality. I think that's kind of like a thing that you're wired to. That's wired in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if somebody wants to do a threesome or whatever, that's not something like, oh, I must always do threesomes. Like I'm biologically wired to do threesomes and threesomes only, or that I can't function. I don't. I kind of would group polyamory in that kind of category there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that
But
makes
there's
sense.
probably
I
people
think
that are naturally polyamorous, and those are kind of the people that just have trouble staying in monogamous relationships. You know, people who just cheat and cheat and cheat. Those are probably the
yeah,
type of people that should be um, polyamorous.
it seems
There's people that
to
can't
like
handle monogamy. That's fine.
yeah,
Those people
yeah.
should be in polyamorous relationships if they can't handle it.
Like it
But I
seems to
think
me
most people can.
based on what what little I've heard from a few polyamorous people is it's either that that they like relationships so much that they want to, it's kind of like they want to have multiple monogamous relationships but they're not monogamous because they, I don't know, they feel like they have so much love to give or something like that. And there are different ways that people do it too. Like there are also people who are a couple who just likes to every once in a while have a threesome, like you were talking about, or maybe they're a couple and they like to just kind of have a standard fuck buddy who has threesomes with them or something like that. It depends on whether you're looking at it in terms of
That sounds
sex or
just
in
more like
terms
a
of
kink.
relationships.
Yeah, because there's
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
kink, and then there's like, oh, I have like full blown relationships with these people.
yeah.
Um, so if we're talking about the full blown relationships, to me that just seems like way too much time consumption there. Like I couldn't.
That's why some polyamorous people say it's not this fun carefree thing. It requires a hell of a lot of work and it's hard and we wouldn't recommend it for most people. That's what those evolutionary psychologists who are polyamorous named Diana Fleischman and Jeffrey Miller have said about it.
Yeah, it just seems like too much work to make it work when it's hard enough to make like a monogamous relationship work.
Yeah,
And it's
even
like
that's a lot of
Jesus
work
Christ.
sometimes.
Yeah, so it's like fuck. I kind of get what they're getting at in this book. But yeah, I think I have preferences. I would like those preferences for my daughter, you know, but outside of that, people do what they do. I wouldn't be authoritarian about not like, non-familial connections,
Right.
and telling them what they should or shouldn't do. Um, the only time I guess I would is if they would like cry on my shoulder and start complaining about how crappy their polyamorous relationships are going. Say, hey, why don't you just try a monogamous one for a while and try to concentrate on one person instead of trying to please like two or three. Um,
And that
so I,
sounds like especially if you're in multiple polyamorous relationships and you're the average person perhaps who's working 2 or 3 jobs and you have kids, how the fuck can you manage all of that?
that's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah,
I only have one kid, and goddamn, um, I don't have a lot of time for myself.
yeah.
So I can imagine how you have all these different relationships and then manage like raising kids. And then you have like these kids that have the possibility of being ostracized or made fun of. How do you show up to the soccer game? Like, oh, that's my dad and that's my other dad and that's my other mom. It's like, yeah, that's not gonna. I don't think your child will be able to go through life easily because of the choices the adult made. You're putting your child through this, and I think it's a little selfish to do that to your kid. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, well, especially because our culture has normalized monogamy so much, so it would seem so abnormal to a kid to be that way. I mean, I guess the only way I could look at this charitably is that you could look at it similarly to two gay parents or two lesbian parents have to
Hmm.
explain why they're different to what's seen as normal for this society to their kids. But then again, also like you were talking about, the
Yeah.
being polyamorous is more of a choice than being gay or being lesbian too.
Yeah, it's much more accepted, I would say, now than it has been in the past. Like, I remember this girl I knew from high school, and she had two moms. So I didn't even think about it like at all. And this is like in the 90s. But yeah, I know our culture. It's well, depending on where you live, of course. Like if you live in a deep red rural area, you're not going to have an easy as a time as living in a big city. But at least there are places that you can go to where you have acceptance within this country, anyway.
Yeah,
But
this country too.
yeah, but um, yeah, that's what I mean by social acceptance. Like, if you are gay and you want to raise a family in a deeply red anti-gay area, um, I would suggest not doing that at all. Move. Just for the mental health benefits of being around accepting people. Like, I can't imagine raising a child in that environment where there was very little acceptance when it came to
Yeah,
that.
might be a better idea to live in a big city where you can
Right,
find some similar sort of social groups.
right. Well, not even similar, like just social groups that accept
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
like that don't. I know there's probably still going to be a little weirdness coming up in school and stuff. Yeah, just from like really, asshole bully people who are usually those people tend to be super insecure. So they got
Oh
to
yeah.
lash out on other people and point out things about them so that they can feel better about themselves. This is going to happen wherever you go. I just see it less like, there's a bully, but then you still have widespread social acceptance for
Yeah,
that
bullies
in
are
particular.
everywhere.
Yeah, they're always going to be everywhere. So that's what I mean, really, is that socially, culturally, we're not there yet with this polyamorous stuff. So I don't think it would work. Wouldn't work well for a kid. I don't think. This isn't. What's the name of This is not Captain Holden. Like, we're not in the future where you can have like 8 parents,
Yeah,
like Captain Holden did.
yeah,
We're not there yet. And I think the
yeah,
psychological impacts, like just thinking of trans, like if you compare like trans people here to trans people like in Thailand, um, the trans people here are not socially accepted like they are in Thailand.
yeah,
So their suicide rate is a lot higher. That's
yeah,
because they're not socially accepted.
yeah.
So I
Whether
wouldn't want
like
to.
whether a trans person is even open about it all the time in public depends on the person too. Like I've known some trans people who are open about it and dress like the opposite gender all the time, and then there are some who live life or go to work as a man and then pretend to be a woman the rest of the time with their friends, or vice versa.
Mhm. Yeah, they present as a gay person at work, and then outside of work is when they dress up like as the opposite gender.
Yeah, probably something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah. So the acceptance is just not there yet, and I wouldn't want to bog people down and say, "Yeah, do this." I'm just saying, "Hey, you could do it," but um, the psychological ramifications of that choice are not there yet. Like, I'm
Mhm.
hoping my daughter never wants to be trans or something like that, knowing what that entails. I don't know what the trans suicide rate for trans men is. I know females, it's pretty high, but
Uh, well, I don't know what do you mean? What do you mean by like trans men and trans women? Do you mean
a
because
trans
they're
man is a biological female who presents as
okay?
a
So
male.
someone who is born as a woman and is transitioning to a man, that's the group who the suicide rate is really high for.
Oh, the trans women have a really high suicide
Oh,
rate.
so what? So people who were born as men and are transitioning to women.
I believe so. I'm not sure how.
Okay.
I think the
Okay.
trans.
That would make sense. That would make sense also because if I understand correctly, I think most trans people are those who were born as men and are transitioning to women.
Yeah, so we're talking about trans women. They're born as men. Trans men are born as women.
Okay.
And I believe it's. I don't know if this is true, but it seems like the ostracization mainly falls on trans women. Like when we
Yeah.
hear about people complaining, it's always the men who transition to women. I don't ever hear that many stories about the persecution of women transitioning to men. But
Yeah,
I would
that's true.
assume, yeah, because I'm just trying to think as a man, and if I had a trans woman or a trans man like in a work group and they're like acting like a dude, I don't think I'd mind. Like it
Yeah.
wouldn't bother me at all. Like, and I can't say that what would happen in a female group. I don't know what the dynamics would be that with a trans man, or I'm sorry, a
Yeah.
trans woman amongst a group of females. Because it seems like
Yeah.
female interaction in groups is a lot different than how men interact in groups. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And it's like that I obviously have no problem too, because I even I think I talked with you and I've talked with a few other people before about how actually through learning about postmodernism and reading Foucault's history of sexuality and watching podcasts with people like Thaddeus Russell talking about gender led me to sexually experiment with trans people. And the and an interesting aspect of that too is like some people are okay, like sexuality is on a scale, right? On a spectrum, right? Yeah, like there are some people who I think are attracted to trans women but not trans men, and vice versa. Like
Mm-hmm.
the or some people are attracted to both, and that's interesting because of what you would think in terms of how that affects how but how much closer to being lesbian or gay someone is on that kind of scale. For example, if someone is attracted to trans women but not trans men, does that mean they might be closer to being gay than straight also?
I have no
This is why
idea.
sexuality is such a fascinating subject to me, because there's so many people have so like such different preferences and just sexualities in terms of the way they were born too.
Yeah, it is weird because I know Caitlyn Jenner prefers women.
Yeah, that's interesting. So she transitioned and then now she's basically living life as a lesbian.
I guess you would consider that a lesbian if it's woman and woman. I don't know how he would or she would say call that relationship.
Yeah,
I'm
I don't
not
know.
super like I don't know
She did
how that works.
did she get the gender reassignment surgery?
I don't think so. I'm not entirely
Oh,
sure.
okay. Oh, if she didn't then that's interesting too, because it's like she's living life as if she were in a lesbian relationship, really, but biologically speaking, because she hasn't transitioned, she's still just more of a, like, it's more of a trans woman being with a cis woman, I guess, is the way that, the most charitable way to put it.
Yeah, if he was going to be with women, I would see zero benefit to chopping off your wang.
Yeah.
None. There's really none. So, yeah, I don't think if he would chop off his wang. There's Johnson, aka it's Peter.
Do you think that, like, do you think that since she transitioned, though, that she might not want to use her dick sexually anyway, even if she's in a relationship with a woman?
Well, why not? Because once you, I don't know, because once
like,
you
if
get
you're
transformed, like
if you
I think your
transition, though,
sensation goes away, doesn't it?
if you transition without getting rid of your dick, though, I think that if you're a trans woman, you still kind of, like, you don't want to have a dick, so you might not want to do anything with it sexually. But I guess that depends on the person too, because I think there are probably, like, oh yeah, there definitely are there are bound to be people who are into, like, doing things with trans women's dicks. I bet there's, like, a whole fucking porn genre about that.
Well, you've seen like all these different scandals of like celebrities getting caught with trans women.
Oh,
So,
really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Eddie Murphy, I think, was caught with a trans woman.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, there are a bunch of like celebrities. I think what's that guy? Hugh Grant
Oh,
was
wow.
caught with a trans woman.
Oh, okay.
Who else? If I'm not mistaken, like the way Magic Johnson got AIDS was with a trans woman.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
I
I didn't know
believe
that.
so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there's been a bunch of like celebrities that got caught up. Like I think who's okay, I'm not super well versed on the Kardashians, but one of the Kardashian sisters, ex-husband, got caught with a trans woman.
Who,
Like
sorry?
one of the Kardashian sisters.
Oh,
I think her
yeah.
name is, I don't remember her name, but one of them had a husband and he got caught with a trans woman.
Didn't one of them transition too?
Not to my knowledge. I have no idea.
I thought I heard that one of the Kardashians.
Oh, was it the brother? I don't think he did.
Did a Kardashian transition? I thought I heard. Maybe I'm confusing it with some other celebrity family.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, in a 2020 interview with Diane Sawyer in April 2015. Oh no, this is just talking about Caitlyn Jenner. Oh, it's Caitlyn Jenner that's related to the Kardashian, the Kardashians. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
she was
why.
like the dad.
Right. That's why I got confused. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I could have told you that. I thought
Yeah.
you meant like one of the like Kardashians, like the brothers or the sisters.
No, that's why I was confused about that, because I forgot that it was Caitlyn Jenner. Used to be Robert Jenner?
It was Bruce Jenner. He was like a famous Olympic athlete.
You still there? Did you lose me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I lost your audio for a second. Maybe I glitched out there.
Yeah, he was a famous Olympic athlete named Bruce Jenner.
Right. Oh, right. Yeah, of course.
And then he turned into Caitlyn.
Right.
Kind of strange, like for for that to play on TV.
Yeah.
And I think she had like a reality show for a while.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I
Huh.
never saw it, but she was always out partying with other trans people or something like that.
Oh, okay. I'm just thinking of South Park episodes right now. There are South Park episodes. There's a whole season where they're basically making fun of Trump, and Mr. Garrison is basically Trump, and Caitlyn Jenner is his vice president, and she goes around running people over.
Oh wow.
And then there's another, oh man, there's a phenomenally offensive episode about trans people where Strong Woman, who is the woman who has a secret relationship with PC Principal, she competes in some sporting event, and her ex-boyfriend comes there and has claimed to transition to being a woman 2 weeks ago and didn't get any surgery or anything. And he comes there and he's wearing a muscle shirt and he's all jacked and has a giant beard and a cowboy hat. And he says, "Yeah, I'm here to beat all the women. Yeah." And then someone asked him about his transition and he said, "I'm not here to talk about my transition. I'm here to be a strong woman and fight for womanhood."
All right, so I got a list of 10 celebrities that got caught with trans people. Justin Bieber, apparently.
Oh, really?
Yeah, was led away at a party by a 40-year-old trans woman.
Oh, wow.
A soul singer named Teddy Pendergrass was caught with a trans woman at a nightclub. Gavin Rosdale
Oh.
and Gwen Stefani.
Oh, wow.
Mace? Really? Mace?
Oh, wow.
The rapper? Got caught with transgender prostitutes. LL Cool J.
Oh, wow.
Just this transgender woman claimed in the memoir that she had a one-time sexual encounter with LL Cool J, and he
Okay.
denied the allegations.
Okay.
And another one, same woman, said it was like some famous hip hop DJ named Mr. C.
Okay.
Brazilian soccer star named Ronaldo Nazario. Lil Bow Wow, I guess he also did.
Is he dead?
No, he did.
Oh, I misheard you. Okay.
Chingy, I guess, is another rapper.
Oh, yeah. Wow. there are more rappers than I thought there would be.
Yeah. And these are just recent ones. Like the ones that I mentioned aren't even on this list. But I found another list and it does have Matt Lauer.
Wow.
It was Eddie Murphy was on this one. I remember that. Yeah, it's a slightly different list.
Okay.
But yeah, celebrities getting caught with the transgenders.
Oh man, there was I watched this video yesterday about this guy who he was competing in the Olympics in swimming and basketball, and he placed number 421st in qualifying for the Olympics, and then he transitioned to being a woman and became number one and knocked out some women from competing in it. That I watched this guy's really deep dive video into what they do for hormone replacement therapy and how that measures up in terms of altering your levels of testosterone and whether how it measures in terms of the amount that the maximum amount that you're allowed for being a woman and the minimum amount that you're allowed for being a man in terms of average, in comparison to average natural levels, because this guy he has transitioned to a she now, but she has not gotten the surgery, so she still has a dick. And basically this guy was getting into the science of in the video about how, especially if you have a dick and you were born as a man, the reason that trans women should not be allowed to compete against women, like biological cisgender women who were born as biological women, is because even if you do like manipulate your testosterone and you take estrogen, the minimum something like the minimum level that it can get to is something like 144 milligrams per deciliter, which is in comparison to natural female levels that are something like 40 to 50 milligrams per deciliter. So even if you're making the most conservative estimates, any average man will have at least 3 times as much testosterone as even the most in shape, fit women on Earth.
I need to take something back. Caitlyn Jenner did get reassignment surgery.
Oh, okay. So she is kind of living her life as a lesbian woman, basically, then.
Yeah, so she's an actual lesbian, like a full-blown one.
Okay.
Okay. So one of the things I wanted to mention about the book is, do you remember what their take on postmodernism was?
I don't remember the exact details. I just remember in general it was the standard kind of dumb take about how postmodernism is stupid and they don't believe in truth and it's all connected to woke lefty craziness and shit like that.
Well, they made an assertion that they said postmodernists believe that reality is socially constructed.
Oh my god. Okay. Again, like no one defines socially constructed when they use it, which tells you that they don't know what it means, because socially constructed, it just means a concept that people agree upon. The people agree that this is what the definition of this particular concept is. That's all it means. That's why, yes, gender is socially constructed, because we've agreed that a man means this and a woman means this. It doesn't mean that men don't have penises and women don't have vaginas. Something can be socially constructed but still have biological aspects. It's like how I've quoted this many times. It reminds me of how, in terms of race, the conservative economist Thomas Sowell has said race is a social construct based on biological characteristics. And if you're talking about reality, reality is socially constructed because it's what we agree that reality is. But that doesn't mean that reality itself does not exist. It's not like we invented reality with our minds or something like that. And that seems to be the impression that people, like the assertion that people like that are making about postmodernism, even though I don't think any postmodernist actually ever said that reality itself is socially constructed either.
Yeah, I think what postmodernists are saying is that the conception of things are socially constructed, but not the
Yeah.
physical aspects of something. So there
Yeah.
might be a socially constructed idea about the moon, but the moon itself is not socially constructed.
Yeah.
So I think what they're saying, well, at least what Heather Heying, because she is the one that read the part about postmodernism, She's implying that physical reality is social constructed, which is not. I don't believe that's what postmodernists argue. They don't say
Yeah,
that
that's a straw man.
yeah, they don't say that an AK-47 is socially constructed. It's actually someone had to go and manufacture it. All right.
Yeah, but we agreed that this concept is of an AK-47 is what qualifies as an AK-47. It's socially constructed because this cup is not an AK-47. We agreed on that. We could decide that it's an AK-47, but that wouldn't make it one.
Right. Like our human categorizations are definitely social constructions.
Yeah.
Like what we categorize, and the categories have changed. Like there have been species of animals that had to be recategorized, but those social constructions doesn't mean that those two particular animals are socially constructed as well. They have a physical component. Like they are not concepts. They have a physical reality, but we
Yeah.
have conceptions about what those things are and what
Yeah.
categories that we place them in.
And another way that's reality is socially constructed and how our social constructions of reality change based upon the way that we learn that we were wrong about the way physical reality is when I think it's when we switch to the heliocentric model of the universe. I think that's the word for
Yeah, the
because we
sun
used
centric.
to yeah, because we used to believe that the Earth was the center of the universe, and people have even gotten executed for suggested that the sun actually is the center of the universe. And then we had this socially constructed reality that the Earth is the center of the universe, and then our socially constructed reality of what qualifies as reality changes when we learned that the physical universe itself is different from our socially constructed definition of universe, in that the sun is actually at the center of or our galaxy, rather, not universe, rather
Yeah, our
than
solar system.
the Earth. Yeah.
Well, even saying that the sun is the center of the galaxy, that would be also debatable. I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
if heliocentrism, like when you say heliocentrism, are you talking like even heliocentrism is incorrect, is what I'm trying to say.
What do you mean?
Heliocentrism is saying that the sun is the center of the universe, which it isn't.
Oh, yeah. Is it though? I think I just misspoke there. Isn't heliocentric saying that the sun is at the center of our galaxy?
When it was when the concept occurred, when it was pushed by Copernicus and Galileo, they were saying that the sun was the center of the universe.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Yeah, that's
yeah,
true. That is wrong also then. Yeah.
yeah, so both geo and heliocentrism are incorrect.
Okay.
Neither the sun nor the earth are the centers of the universe.
Right.
But
Yeah, that's
even
true.
then, do we even know where the center of the universe is?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Let me ask Google real quick, because I don't even know if we know that.
Where is the center of the universe?
Um,
There is no center of the
no
universe.
center. There is no center. So it's possible. It is possible that helio and geocentrism could be correct.
There is no center to the expansion of the universe. It is the same everywhere. Yeah,
So there's just no center at all.
apparently. Yeah, every like headline I'm going to here in brief description of it says that there is no center of the universe. That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's weird.
Cool. Yeah.
Oh, so I guess they are both incorrect then.
Yeah.
Neither are correct. Neither heliocentrism or geocentrism are correct.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that heliocentrism was wrong. I thought it was, oh yeah, the sun, but it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know
according
that
to,
either.
Oh, okay. Heliocentric, having representing the sun. Well, I guess if you say it's heliocentric, if our solar system is heliocentric, you can say that. But if
Yeah.
you say the universe is heliocentric, then that would be correct. Incorrect.
Yeah.
So, so when it occurred, when that term was in debate, they were actually wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So they had an ink. They were more correct than the church, probably. But even then, neither of them were right. So
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting to think about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Did you have anything more to say about the Hunter Gatherer's Guide?
Well, the only other criticisms that I had similar to the monogamy and casual sex being bad for everyone claim was that they also claim that porn and BDSM are inherently bad for everyone, which again, I think is just such a stupid massive generalization that certainly does not apply to everyone because there's so much individual variation among people. And even if you look at porn as a drug, most people do not get addicted to it. They just use it in moderation and don't get addicted to it. It's not actually that difficult to look at porn and jack off sometimes, but not have it take over your entire life. And in terms of BDSM, there are also plenty of people who do some fucking stuff that seems like really crazy and weird sexual shit to many of us, but there's still completely psychologically healthy people and would seem like what we would call normal in every other way. So it's just a massive oversimplification and generalization to say that these things are bad for everyone. If you want to use porn or have fetishes or shit like that, I think you should do that as much as you want, as long as you don't let any of that take over your life or destroy your life or in any way. Like maybe similarly to polyamory, you might not want to do a bunch of BDSM stuff when your kids are home, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna say something interesting that this reminded me of. I remember going to high school, and when you're in high school, typically the first period is the period where you would hear teachers rant about random shit. I don't know why it was always first period, but it seemed like they would always need to get something off their chest from what happened like the night before.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, this happened to me in a lot of different classes. Like my first period teachers tended, like if something happened the night before, they tended to rant about it like in the first period.
Okay.
But anyway, I had this economics teacher named Don LeCompte, and one morning he ranted that, and this is economics class, folks. I was a senior, and he started to rant by saying masturbation was God's gift to man.
What?
Yeah, talk about fucking awkward.
Wow.
And this is not a health class. This is economics. And
Wow.
he started to justify that statement by saying it keeps you monogamous because you don't cheat and stuff like that. And I didn't think
Oh.
about this at the time, but now that I'm thinking about it now, why the fuck would he just kind of randomly rant about this in the first period
Yeah.
class? So
Yeah.
my guess is like he got caught jacking off by his wife and got in like big trouble or something like that.
That's entirely possible.
That probably has to be the reason. Like, why would he rant about this in the first period class if that wasn't the case?
Yeah. I
Like, we don't
think
talk about those topics in economics, so
maybe he has a
uh,
point though. Maybe if you I don't know, if you go jack off before you go to the company Christmas party with a whole bunch of hot chicks that you like, maybe you'd be less likely to try and cheat on your wife.
I think Rogan probably didn't he say something like that?
He said he's talked a lot about how you'll make way less dumb decisions if you jack off first.
Yeah, yeah, I know he's remarked on that before.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I was trying to. I thought that was an interesting segue regarding that. Like and basically, it's kind of like a support for the porn argument
Yeah.
that it keeps you monogamous. But
Well,
some,
like especially if you're like a really lonely guy and you're socially awkward and you have trouble getting laid and you don't want to break the law to have sex with a prostitute, which again, I think that should be legal anyway, but if you don't want to do that, then well, it seems like probably a pretty good thing that you can have porn and not I mean, you can still jack off without porn, of course, but it's better that way, and you can sexually enjoy yourself without, and maybe you're less likely to try to rape someone because of that too, and or make it, and maybe you're more likely to be happy and less depressed about not getting laid and that sort of thing.
right, right. So, any more like I think I've kind of expressed mostly of what I've expressed. So the only thing I changed on basically after reading the book was that I somewhat agree that the preferable method would be monogamy. I'm not saying everybody should do it, but I think it's our society, at least in the United States, is built around that. And if you don't choose that, then you might have a hard time. I'm not saying the family structure for a non-monogamous couple. You either have those that attempt monogamy and get divorced and end up having to deal with step parents or a single parent, or it's I guess you got to weigh what's better for the child. Attempting to have a step parent, and then there's issues there as well.
Yeah,
Um, like this, you kind of have a less likelihood of having like a step parent isn't always a good substitution for a biological parent. Sometimes it
yeah,
can be, but that's not always the case. And it could actually be worse than being a
yeah, for
single
sure.
parent, depending on if that person isn't a perv and weird.
Yeah,
Um, or having to deal with a family structure that is not orthodox or supported by society. So I guess it just depends. But since society supports monogamy, I think it would be easier to choose that and live a healthier life. So
yeah, that's fair.
I think I will agree that monogamy is somewhat an easier and supported, healthier lifestyle. But I'm not saying that because it's evolutionary. I'm saying that because it's society. I'm pretty sure there's probably other societies out there that have done a good job with that. It's just ours doesn't support it.
Yeah, that's fair. I can understand that.
Hmm. So yeah, that's what I changed on. So I upgraded to 3 stars from 2. Um, the reason I gave it 2 last time is because of how triggered I was about the postmodernism stuff. But I think there's some like good stuff in there and there's some bad stuff in there. I wouldn't, yeah, that basically that's what we're saying here.
Yep. Yeah, I would say so.
Um, so how many stars are you gonna give this thing?
I still gave it 2 stars because the earlier parts about evolution were good, but a lot of the prescriptions just really annoyed me.
So the annoyance of the prescriptions weighed a lot on your decision.
Yeah, that outweighed the earlier parts of the book that I enjoyed.
Okay, okay. All right, so 2 stars from Andrew, 3. Would you recommend this to anybody?
Yeah, I would say it's I would say it's still worth reading, and especially if you're someone who disagrees with us or me about their, how much evolutionary validity there actually is behind their prescriptions. You probably would like it a lot more if you're more of like the IDW type of person, or even if you disagree with them more than we do, it's good to get into the details of arguments of people you disagree with and see that they have more sophisticated reasons behind their arguments than you might have thought they do, at least, if nothing else.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Um, I guess I would recommend it to, I don't know, definitely not to young people. I don't think this really applies to them at
Yeah.
all, to be honest. Um, it's probably better for more like family-oriented people, even though it or maybe someone who's thinking about starting a family or thinking about um, getting a little bit more, after their oats have been soiled, they kind of want to settle down and see what life is about. Um, and they want to pursue, starting a family with kids, even though that they might not be in a relationship, but they want to kind of look down the road a little bit. I think this is probably something to check out.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to talk about any of the books that you read recently?
Yeah, of course. Oh yeah, well, right now I am reading Pride and Prejudice and Zombies Dreadfully Ever After, which is
Hmm.
the sequel to Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, of course, the kind of basically book that's Pride and Prejudice and or Pride and Prejudice plus zombies, and it's kind of a parody, but it's it's done in kind of a serious way too, which, and I think the whole series, there are 3 books in the series. I think they're all good. Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, and the prequel, which is Pride and Prejudice and Zombies Dawn of the Dreadfuls, and then this one is the sequel to Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which is Dreadfully Ever After. And I think Pride and Prejudice and Zombies was the first one that was written, if I understand correctly. And I think in the order they were written, because the prequel was written after that, I think the author has gotten progressively better, which is cool because so far in this book, I think the plot is much more interesting, and there are different groups of characters doing things simultaneously, and there are more twists and turns, and there's conspiracy, and I just like the whole aspect of the way they go about killing zombies in this Victorian era. They learn all these deadly arts of Shaolin Kung Fu and stuff like that to use on zombies, along with swords and muskets. So the way they kill zombies, of course, is really good too. Yeah, I like this book and all three books in the series.
So they use swords and muskets.
Yeah.
Man, the muskets must take a while to like reload and stuff.
Yeah, they often there have been a few battle sequences where they'll fire one shot from a musket or a little like flintlock pistol, and then use it to bludgeon the zombies to death.
Because if they don't get a headshot, then they kind of have to, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So do they know to shoot from the head and those in that time period?
Yeah, they figured it out. The zombie
Okay.
apocalypse has been going on for a while, so most people have known that for a long time.
Okay, so they know you got to shoot them in the head.
Yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, I also yesterday I listened to some short stories by a few people. I listened to a few by Stephen King and a few by Ray Bradbury. A few of them were science fiction and a few of them were horror. I wasn't really a huge fan of those, but I also listened to this one by Joe Hill, who is that author who's the son of Stephen King and also writes some really interesting horror. He
Mhm.
I think it was called The Black Phone, and it's about it's basically about this serial killer who kidnaps and murders children, and it's from the perspective of a child who wakes up in this murderer's basement, and there's a black phone in there, and it rings, and when you answer the phone, the people who are talking to you are the dead children who have been murdered, and the dead children are somehow trying to help this kid escape. And that was a really interesting short story for sure.
That's pretty macabre.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a good author. I don't like him as much as Stephen King, but I would say his books that I've read so far are almost as good as a lot of the Stephen King that I've read. He's
Hmm.
definitely a good author. I actually also just recently finished a long epic novel, the longest one of his that I've read so far, Joe Hill's, which was called The Fireman, which was really good too. It was kind of post-apocalyptic fantasy horror in the contemporary world, basically, and it's about this spore caused virus that that people call dragon scale for short instead of its scientific name. And basically what happens is it starts tattooing you in yellow and gold, and then after that point you get more and more tattooed until at some random point, depending on the person, you spontaneously combust. So it basically caught very quick. The virus is very contagious and causes the world to collapse. And then at one point, the main character, who was a teacher, but then she gets involved with being a nurse. I guess without getting into too much spoilers, some of the characters get involved with this separatist cult who is led by the fireman, the title character, who has learned to control the virus to be able to basically use it as a weapon and to defend people, so he can like throw fireballs at people and shit like that. So, and that's just the start of where the story goes. So that's a really good book too.
Sounds
Yeah.
interesting.
I also read this book by the Marxist economist David Harvey. His book called A Brief History of Neoliberalism. That is one of the ones that was recommended to me by Chief Keef, aka Tim Keefe, a while ago. And yeah, it's really interesting. I would say it goes into basically the history, the political philosophy of neoliberalism itself, and the history of it being implemented in various countries throughout the world since the 70s, like the US and China and and Britain and several other countries. And he kind of talks about some basically neoconservatives who he lumps into the category of neoliberals too, like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And he talks about what it's about. Like, it's all about deregulation and how all of these policies have really actually made global economies a lot worse in the long run, and how even depending on how you define it, a lot of the neoliberal policies have even defied the very goals that it started off with in the first place. So yeah, that's a really good book. It was a really educational one about the history of neoliberalism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds interesting. Kind of reminds me of this Philosophy Tube series that I watched about neoliberalism.
Oh, okay.
You ever watch Philosophy Tube?
Yeah, I've watched some of their videos. I haven't watched that many. I think maybe a handful. I think I might have seen a few that they did on Jordan Peterson and a few other public intellectuals like that, perhaps.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of their Jordan Peterson videos. He goes kind of talks about history of neoliberalism. There's like a 4 or 5 part series on it. I thought it was pretty informative.
Cool. Yeah, maybe I should check that out. Yeah. Cool. So, I guess that's all I can think of off the top of my head that I read recently, other than rereading A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century, of course, and then I reread Six of the Dust recently, of course, before we talked about it on my channel yesterday. I guess that's mostly what I can remember that I can think of off the top of my head that I read recently.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see. What did I finish? I finished The Never-Ending Story.
Right.
The first half of the book is good. It pretty much mimics the movie. Second half is like WTF. I didn't like it. As the main character is just kind of an asshole for most of the book on the second half.
Okay.
Which is why I was like, oh, no wonder they kind of ended the movie right there. But I was, yeah, it's interesting. Like, it's definitely YA. And I found the first half of the book like much more interesting. Like the second half of the book, I think even the second movie kind of is based off of the second half, where he kind of gets like godlike powers and he becomes somewhat of a boring character.
Oh,
and
okay.
then yeah.
I didn't even know that there was a second book.
Oh, it's just one book. There's just, I think, 3 movies based off of that book.
Or I mean, I didn't know that there was a second movie.
Oh yeah, the second movie came out in I think the 90s. But it was okay. I give it 3 stars. I also finished Preventing the Next Pandemic by Peter Hotez.
That's a great book.
I really liked it. It was interesting and refreshing take. The book was mostly about international cooperation and efforts regarding a bunch of different diseases. It wasn't just exclusively. Actually, it wasn't that much about COVID. They did talk about the Decepticons somewhat, but I didn't know that Hotez was such an accomplished person. He had traveled around the world to promote vaccines and to get countries that have these endemic diseases to help them out. And at least he was in charge of that, and he was part of the government, and he got sent as an ambassador, like a medical ambassador to these different countries to help them develop their own vaccines and stuff. I think one of the more interesting things is He kind of talked about the history of this position and how he modeled himself after um, this U.S. It was a position that he held previously. It was another guy, but he cooperated with some Russian scientists during the Cold War, and the Russians became, um, I think they started manufacturing polio vaccines. And the only way they were able to eradicate polio is because they got this kind of global um, consensus and mandate, even though that there was like Cold War going on between two superpowers, they were
Yeah.
still able to cooperate regarding health matters. So I thought it was a really interesting book. Yeah, and it's not just about. He said it's interesting how war and instability contributes to um, endemic diseases. How there are certain factors in certain countries that contribute to the spread of disease. So this,
Yeah.
now that I'm thinking about that, now that Ukraine is in the state it is, it almost sounds like they might have some problems with some endemic diseases soon because just total destruction that's going on and the lack of infrastructure that they might have in dealing with these things. I think he even talked about Syria and other war-torn countries in Africa that once they started becoming politically unstable, you saw more instances of Ebola and stuff like that appear.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
So
related to how the wars in the Middle East have caused there to be more endemic diseases due to the lack of cooperation between governments, right?
yeah, cooperation, instability, um, just infrastructure breakdowns. When stuff is not stable, priorities are different. So you're not going to prioritize certain things like stopping certain diseases and stuff like that. Like they're just in survival mode at that point. So yeah, it was really interesting. I thought it was a pretty good book. I think I give it 4 stars.
Yeah, I think I did too.
So outside of that, I don't think we talked about. Yeah, I didn't really talk about that book, but one of the ones that I'm currently reading is, well, actually one I just finished today. I finished Bullfinch's Mythology, and it
Right.
was weird because it covers Norse mythology also, and I was like, wow, because he got into a little bit into more depth into the Norse mythology, not in the same aspects that Neil Gaiman did. Like Neil Gaiman covered more stories, and he told those stories with more flair. But the few stories that he did cover were almost like identically told. So I was like, did the Norse just have more to go on? Because a lot of the other stuff that Bullfinch covered was like super superficial. I know that he covered some stuff that was like in the Iliad and in the Odyssey, but he kind of lightly touched on some of those. But some of the other like myths are like 2 minutes long, and I was like, "What? It's over already? There's no more about this particular god or hero." And that's what
Yeah.
they were about, like gods and heroes. And the interesting thing is, he got into a little bit more depth about like the actual impact of Norse mythology and how some of our days are named after Norse gods, like Wednesday and Thursday. Like Wednesday is after Odin, and Thursday is named after Thor.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
So we got two Norse gods that populate our days of the week. And I always forget that our planets are the Roman names for Greek gods. Like Jupiter is Zeus, and you have like Pluto, who is Hades, and
Right.
Mars, who's Aries, and Venus, who is Aphrodite. One of the things I didn't like about Bullfinch's mythology is that I do not like the Roman names. I do prefer the Greek names. I get really confused when he uses the Roman names, and I keep having to track back. Okay, so when he's talking about Minerva, who's Minerva? Oh, he's talking about Athena. So I kept having to like do the conversions in my head because natively, when I think of like the Greek gods, I don't think of them with the Roman names. So it kind of like threw me off. Even it took a while for me to equate Zeus and Jupiter. It's like, okay, Jupiter, Zeus, Jupiter, Zeus. Jupiter gets talked about so much and it gets ingrained pretty quickly. But some of the more obscure gods, it took me a while to like, oh yeah, that's this god and this is that god. Yeah, Bullfinches, it's okay. He sprinkles like so much Paradise Lost in there though in poems. I was like, what?
Oh,
It's like after every single myth, it's like, oh, let me do this Paradise Lost interpretation of this particular myth. I was like, oh, that's enough of this Paradise Lost stuff because it's just poems he's reciting, right?
right, right. Yeah, I read
Um,
Paradise Lost once, and it was pretty boring to me.
is this a poem, right? Poems?
Yeah, it's a long epic poem.
Okay. Well, do you know when it was written?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. It was a long time ago, maybe the 1500s. I'm gonna look it up.
That long ago? Holy crap.
I think it's pretty fucking old. Let me see. Oh, 1667 actually. So
Yeah, that's pretty old.
1600s. Yeah.
So, yeah, they covered a little bit of Egyptian and a little bit of and Indian mythology. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. The vast majority of the book is mostly about Greek mythology. It's only until you get to like the last couple chapters that he talks about these other mythologies, like Norse and Indian and Egyptian.
Right.
Um, and then the thing that I'm reading now that I'm not done with is Faces on the Bottom of the Well from Derek Bell, who's
Mhm.
known as being the founder of critical race theory. So the book itself is not even a CRT text. It's just like a fiction story, but I don't consider Derek Bell a very good fiction writer.
Yeah, we were talking about that before. This is why I really like this book of his way worse than his book that I actually really like called Silent Covenants that I'm probably going to do a video about at some point on my channel.
Yeah, for a fiction book, it's very, very heavy-handed and preachy. Like, if you're gonna do fiction, you can subtly weave these themes into the story, but it seems like um, the primary reason he wrote this was um, to express like particular political views. It wasn't like the story was the thing he carried about the most. In the dialogue between all the characters, it's like, okay, all these characters sound like they're lawyers talking to each other, um, which can seem kind of strange. So yeah, I'm gonna get through it, but I was kind of expecting something else. I did not know that this was a fiction story. I was expecting like some type of nonfiction CRT arguments or something.
Yeah, that's why Silent Covenants is way better for that.
All right. And then I'm starting to work back on Winter's Arch for. I'm listening to the chapters I had read previously to get prepared for our next week. I am continuing to read this book. Man, we're in book 9. Jeez.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Still
that's
5 more books
pretty
to
much
go
it.
after that.
Yeah, I can't wait to get to the juicy Sanderson ones.
Yeah,
But I think
those
the
are good.
Sanderson books are just paced a little bit better
Hmm.
because they're a bit more actiony. I know some of the characters are kind of strange. Perrin becomes like a Super Saiyan, basically, in the dream world, like Super Saiyan Perrin in dream world. Like Matt gets more goofy and weird.
Yep.
Rand becomes Zen Rand. But like
Yeah.
I think all the action and combat sequences get major upgrades though.
Yeah, for sure.
Unless you don't get any sword form descriptions for the sword fights anymore. You get like actual like sword fights.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that because just the description of the sword forms is less interesting.
Yeah, and more detailed combat. You get some new characters that were created by Sanderson. I think one of my favorite moments from the last three books is when Androl like unleashes the freaking lava waterfall on everybody.
Yeah.
He's like the master of gateways. He sucks at everything else except gateways.
Yeah.
He's just a beast when it comes to those gateways. But
Yeah.
yeah, I can't wait. And then we got quite a while until season 2, right?
Yeah. And probably by the sounds of it, as you and Tristram and I were discussing, maybe we'll be starting to do the analyses of the episodes of The Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power on my channel, season 1 of that before season 2 of Wheel of Time.
Yeah, and that should be coming soon. When is season 1 release for the Rings of Power?
I'm pretty sure it's November.
Oh, that's still pretty far away too.
Mm-hmm.
November? I thought that's when Wheel of Time was coming out.
Maybe it's September. I'll double check right now. The Rings.
Yeah, because
Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. Oh yeah, September 2nd. Yeah, it is September.
Well, when is the next Wheel of Time coming out?
I'll look up that too.
Because I think they have a date already, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, October 28th.
Okay, so it's 1 month
Oh,
later.
there's gonna be a period of time when they're going on at the same time, I bet.
Yeah, so Tristram's gonna be busy.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that should be exciting.
Yeah.
I think I have to try to reread the Silmarillion before it comes out. Man, that's such a difficult read.
Just do what I'm doing and listen to that Legendarium series that they're doing on the Silmarillion. I think they're doing a 10-part series, a 10-episode series on it. I think they've done 3 or 4 episodes so far.
Yeah, maybe I might just do that. I remember the difficulty I had last time reading the Silmarillion because some of it is just super dry.
Some parts of it are interesting, but yeah, some parts of it are phenomenally boring for sure, too.
Yeah, because there's like one chapter I remember that all it does is describe geography. I was like, Jesus, man.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's glad to know that where the I don't know what they're called, the Chrysogrim, where the eagles live. I was like, oh, that's where they're at. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty super dry.
Yeah.
All right. So sounds like we're about ready to sign off here. Do you have any plugs that you want to push?
Yeah, if people want to, they should check out my YouTube channel, Mindgasms, where yesterday Dusty and Tristram and we talked about the recent massive news of Brandon Sanderson, the fantasy author, revealing that he wrote 5 extra novels during the COVID pandemic, in addition to keeping on track with the others that he was writing. And he started a Kickstarter to fund a temporary subscription box service to release 4 of those novels quarterly throughout 2023. And we also talked about the short story called Six of the Dusk, which was Dusty's pick out of the Arcanum Unbounded collection of short stories by Brandon Sanderson, which is a fantasy, kind of a sci-fi fantasy short story about birds that grant people magic powers on a monster island. And also check out the I mentioned I'm working on that Jordan Peterson criticism video that I'm gonna put out about criticizing him on ivermectin and this Bill 67 in Canada, and all of the standard philosophies, philosophical schools of thought that he demonizes, like critical theory, critical race theory, postmodernism, and Marxism, and how he says these are supposedly attached to the bill as well, and which I'm pretty sure they're not. So I'm going to go into that. And also this Wednesday, ideally, I'm going to be talking with Ben Burgess again, the leftist writer, podcaster, philosopher, and YouTuber, and political commentator. And we're going to talk about the anti-capitalist left-wing history of anarchism that anarcho-capitalists never mention, along with what I see to be as philosophical faith claims and tautologies that do not measure up to empirical economic observations in Austrian economics that the anarcho-capitalists love. And I wanted to talk with Ben about the whole Russia-Ukraine situation too, and I thought it would be interesting to talk about a specific philosophical aspect of it as well, which is related to this philosopher named Alexander Dugin, who I thought was interesting when I've listened to him on Thaddeus Russell's podcast, The Historian, and also I've seen Michael Millerman, another philosopher, comment on Alexander Dugin on Thaddeus Russell's podcast, and I thought his thoughts were interesting because he kind of sounds like a postmodernist, but he's kind of a postmodern conservative in a way. And I thought it would be interesting to talk to Ben Burgess about that, because I didn't know until I heard him talk about it on his recent episode with Nathan Robinson, and I think maybe 1 or 2 other episodes, that Alexander Dugin is apparently credited for being a huge influence on Putin. And apparently he's also considered to be a right-wing reactionary by people like Ben too. So all of those topics will be very fun to get into. So check that out as well on Mindgasms.
Well, Alexander Dugin is an influence on Putin?
Yeah, people disagree rather about the degree to which he is an influence on Putin. Some people think he's a major influence, and some people think he's less of an influence. But in some way, it seems like he has been an influence on whatever Putin's philosophy is.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I was going to ask you too, because we forgot to do a ranking. So how do you rank the 3 short stories?
Oh yeah, on the Arcanum Unbounded ones?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, I guess my favorite one is Shadows for Silence in the Forests of Hell. I'm pretty sure I gave that one 5 stars, and I think I gave both of the other 2 4 stars, Emperor's Soul and Six of the Dusk, even though I like Six of the Dusk slightly more than Emperor's Soul. So I guess out of 3, I would say for me, Shadows for Silence of Hell is number 1, Six of the Dusk is number 2, and Emperor's Soul is number 3. What about you? I know Six of the Dusk is your number 1.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really tough for me for the 2 spot. And I gave Emperor's Soul the 2 spot because if I wasn't so biased about the pick that I made, I'd give Emperor Soul the number one. I think it is a very good piece of writing.
For sure.
Just amazing. Just the way that story is constructed and the philosophy that goes into that story and the minimalism. And what I mean by minimalism, it takes place pretty much in a single room for most of that story.
Yeah.
I thought it was a really great exercise in writing. So I gave that a 2. Shadows for Silence is very good as well. It's actually more my taste, but I had to give credit for the Emperor Soul because it's pretty much like a masterpiece. Um, I would have given it 1, but I really liked Six of Dust, so I gave that 1. And I kind of gave Emperor Soul 2 by default.
Cool.
But if I were to be super subjective about my ranking, I probably would put Shadows for Silence at 2. But Emperor Soul is just goddamn that has so much is right with it. Like it's not typically the types of story I like, but it's just an amazing piece of writing in general. So I just put it in the 2.
Yeah, I get that. That's fair. My own rating is just entirely subjective on my part. But yeah, Emperor's Soul is really great too. And like I said, I gave Six of the Dusk and Emperor's Soul the same rating, even though I like Six of the Dusk slightly more. And I love all 3 of these stories even more than I did the first time I read them, as often, well, actually, as has always happened when I've reread anything by Brandon Sanderson so far.
Yeah, because when I reread them, I also re-listened to Secret History
Oh, okay.
as well. Is that usually whenever I go back to Arcanum Unbounded, I was listening to the like Mistborn related stories. I always find those super interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, Six of the Dusk is pretty damn good. I love that story.
Yeah, it's awesome.
All right, so yeah, we can go ahead and wrap it up next week. Join us on our channels. I'll be talking about we'll do Wheel of Time, the next chapter, part 2 of the 3 parts we usually do for these books. So we'll be covering chapters. I think it was 11 to 22, if I'm not mistaken, or it might even be 11 to 23.
Oh, let me know for sure. Let me know for sure, because I think I only went up to 20, because I think that's what you said last time before you were saying that maybe we should do a few more chapters, because I think I have maybe 3 more chapters to read if that's the case.
Yeah, let me check my ebook really quick to confirm that for you. So,
Okay.
let me just, because I was looking at the.
Also,
Go
that
ahead.
reminds me, while you're looking that up, I forgot to mention also next weekend to check out on my channel, you and Parker and I are going to talk about that book called Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman, which of course is his stories about Norse mythology, which are really great.
Right, yeah, that's gonna be fun. Shoot, what? Okay, yeah, it's gonna be the 22.
Up to the end of 22?
Yeah, up to the end of 22.
Okay, I'll read those as soon as I can then.
All right, cool,
Yeah,
man.
I'll
So we're
definitely,
gonna,
that'll be
yeah,
no
so
problem for me to read those by the weekend. Yeah.
yeah, that should be nothing for you. It's like 5 minutes for Andrew.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so yeah, join us next week. So we're gonna talk about the Wheel of Time, book 9, the second part. And on Andrew's channel, we're going to talk about hopefully Norse mythology. And that's going to be with Neil Gaiman. And that should be really fun too.
For sure.
All right. So everybody, you take it easy. Thank you for joining our stream. Like and subscribe. And can't wait to see you guys next week.
Yep. Adios until next time, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.